Dan, thank you so much for joining me. Dan, that video was really strange. I kind of still don't know what to make of it. Maybe she's high. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, it was a strange video for sure, but I'll tell you this. What AOC will understand about capitalism is when it's her turn to get rich. And as we've seen so many times with politicians in Washington, D.C., they come to Washington not rich, and they get rich while they're there, or they certainly get rich afterwards. So I can assure you these things that she's talking about, she'll feel differently when it's her turn to, quote unquote, cash in. But I'm going to tell her straight up what the difference is between capitalism and socialism in the most simple terms. Capitalism means freedom. Socialism means government control. So I'm a capitalist, and I'm for capitalism, not socialism.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm sure you remember, I think we talked about it on the show, how she had this little merch shop online where she was selling cheap sweatshirts that probably cost her a couple bucks or a couple cents for $60 each. What does that say about AOC?
Well, it says that she's a hypocrite, as are many politicians. I mean, that just goes with the territory. Obviously, we're talking about her, and she's certainly hypocritical in her statements and in her actions. But we find this in general with politicians. That's why so many people get fed up about what goes on in Washington, D.C. Look, if you're going to Washington, D.C., you're supposed to go there to serve. Not to get rich, not for it to be all about you or furthering your personal interests. It's about the people. And that is why I've said so many times, we need term limits. Go to serve and get out.
Yeah, well, seems like some members, such as AOC, are worried about trying to get famous so that they have a big name ID so that they can get paid a lot of money for speeches and sell books and sell merch like these $60 sweatshirts. It's just so shameless, and I couldn't agree with you more on term limits. Now, over at Bloomberg, social media is just fired up, trashing Bloomberg over their recent tweet and article talking about how inflation hurts most people making less than $300,000, adding that people should take the bus, stop buying in bulk, and try lentils instead of meat. That is so condescending and so un-American. Like, we don't want people telling us what we should eat or how we should get to work. Instead of looking at the actual problem here, I don't know, maybe like a new president, that's how we fix inflation. New direction for this country. But to tell people that they should switch out meat for lentils, again, I just think is really insulting.
It is insulting, and it's also being tone deaf. Look, the part of that op-ed that talks about people being hurt that are making less than $300,000 because of inflation, that's absolutely true. Look, inflation is a regressive tax. It's a flat tax. It hurts everyone across the board. So the less money you have, the less available financial wherewithal you have, the more inflation's going to hurt. So I do agree there. However, when you start telling people, well, listen, maybe if your pet is sick, you don't get the chemotherapy and you just let your dog die. Or you don't eat meat, you eat lentils instead. These types of things are extremely insensitive. The answer is, what are we doing about inflation? That's really what the problem is. Look, we didn't have this type of inflation a couple years ago. Now we do. Well, what happened during that period of time? We need to take a look at what happened in the environment as well as what the policies were and the policies that were put in place. Let's address those issues. Let's fix the problem and not give people, quite frankly, stupid advice.
Yeah, I saw the one about the chemo for the dog. And this was from Bloomberg's checkmark Twitter account, their official Twitter account. They're saying from selling your car to foregoing chemotherapy for your dog. I mean, that is so cruel. That is just such a cruel thing to say and then to post and publish. And think about what went on in the newsroom. Things don't just like appear online. There's meetings, there's conversations, like there's some sort of editorial process, and they thought that that would be okay. Think about what dogs mean to families, by the way. Dogs are part of the family these days. You don't just skip chemo for your dog.
I
right?
agree with you. And I think you're right from the standpoint of, look, this wasn't one person writing this. No one looked at it and it went to print. There were multiple people at multiple levels looking at this. So, yes, to turn around and say, look, inflation's getting bad, let your dog die. I just can't imagine that there aren't dog owners in the process here to say, well, maybe we should at least cut that part out. But apparently, when you're driven so much towards an ideology, you throw all of that out and you just stay focused in on, your political viewpoints as opposed to what's real in the world.
Exactly. Now, gas prices, we're going to talk about it every single day because this is something people really care about, obviously, because they're having to figure out how to balance their budget with the increase in the spike in oil. So with that being said, in my area, gas is still the same as it was last week and the week before. But we're learning that some states are taking measures to somewhat relieve the pain at the pump, if you will. They're trying to freeze extra gas tax and so on. Do you think this is going to be effective? Will it work?
Well, it's going to be a very temporary Band-Aid. Again, we're not looking at what the problem is. We're just focused in on how do we get immediate relief. So, yeah, if you're going to have various states, or even if the federal government considers rolling back the gas tax for a period of time, well, you know what happens? We keep spending at the same pace. So those taxes are going to come back, and they're going to come back even higher. Now, what we really have to look at is that gas prices, I don't believe, are going to be going any lower. Look at what's happening right now around the world, starting with Ukraine. So we already know there's issues because of that war. On top of that, you have Europe that seems to be leaning towards now saying, maybe we're going to follow the United States and we're not going to be purchasing Russian oil. Then in Saudi Arabia, they had an attack on their oil fields, right, and their issues with Yemen. So now all of those things are going to cause gas prices to go up. Why? Not because of demand, but there's going to be a shortage in supply.
And it just affects all aspects of our lives. It's not just filling up the car, as you pointed out. It's everything from our purchases at the supermarket and everything else. So it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt for a while. Well, Dan, we're out of time. We got to leave it here. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph.
Of course. Coming up next, ESPN announcers hold a moment of silence.